Hey everybody, I hope you're having a great day so far. And I decided to record this video on Zoom versus our live training because we have had so many glitches lately. And I have a very special guest and good friend today that I want to make sure we have no technical problems, right? This is Dr. Evan Hirsch. I'm so glad he's with us. He is kind of famous, you guys. So I'm really excited to introduce him to our group. He is the author, best-selling author of the book Fix Your Fatigue, and he happens to be my friend. We met this year in David Bear's legendary group, and we're sort of fast friends. So I can't wait for you to meet him. So his specialty is, sort of fixing fatigue and energy, which I think is something all of us can really optimize. So tell us a little about yourself. Give us your background. How did you become the energy doctor?
Well, first, Kimmy, thanks so much for having me on. It's
Yeah.
really such great work that you're doing, and I'm excited to be a part of it. So for me, I had a kind of a conventional path going. I went to medical school, I went to residency in family medicine, and along that way, I had a lot of questions that couldn't get figured out by conventional medicine. I would ask a question,
Right.
if they couldn't answer it, then I started looking for other answers, and I found holistic medicine, and then integrative medicine, and then functional medicine, and then environmental medicine. But part of this path also was I had just joined my family medicine residency program in Olympia, Washington, and I met my wife and we fell in love. And 3 months later, she couldn't get out of bed
Mm.
because she was so tired. And so she had fatigue. And here I am going through residency, and I'm supposed to be at like the top of my learning game in medicine. And I'm asking all of my attendings, and I'm doing all this research that I can while working 80 hours a week. And I couldn't help her. This was back in the early 2000s, and there wasn't a lot of information about fatigue in general. With conventional medicine, it's kind of like lung disease, liver disease, heart disease. There's really thyroid was kind of like the only hormone that is being looked at in conventional medicine.
At that
So
time, certainly,
at
right?
that time,
You didn't really have, if you think back, everyone, to like the year 2000, I mean, kind of, I'm not saying that sort of like the naturopathic, sort of approaches, the holistic approaches, the integrative approaches, that was kind of a nebulous space and not as sort of widely known and available as say today in the year 20 years later. Would you agree with that? That this sort of branch has really blossomed over the last 20 years?
absolutely. I mean, internet really didn't take off until like mid 90s. I remember going to college in the mid 90s and we had like just gotten email, and it
Mhm.
was like this old rudimentary, right? You remember that?
Yeah, me too. So we
Yeah,
can say that because that sort of dates us. What are you talking
right.
about?
I know.
We've
I don't- I
always
grew up with an iPhone. I don't know what you're talking about.
I do. So you were really looking for ways, inside your current, inside your current medical studies to maybe help her, even with seasoned professionals around you, and you're sort of coming up empty-handed in terms of, gosh, how could I help? She doesn't have a chronic disease. What's going on? So you're sort of like, what now?
Yeah, and I felt incredibly powerless. I mean, here's this woman that I love and I want her to be better, and she's not, and I can't help her. And I go into this profession to like help people,
Right.
right? And I can't even help my loved ones. So really disempowering, and just it was crushing for both of us. And so so then I started learning more about holistic integrative functional medicine and started to help her. She got over her fatigue in 3 years, and she mainly did it. The shortcut is for her, she got over it working largely on a lot of her emotional health. She did some sauna, she did some adrenal support, but largely emotional health. So she kind of came out of it. I graduated residency, we got married, we had a kid, I started a medical practice, and then I got fatigue for 5 years,
Oh my gosh.
and it just about destroyed my life. I had uh, 4,000 square feet of office space and 10 employees. And here I am trying to run this functional medicine practice. And I could barely remember the name of the person in front of me. My brain fog was so bad. My body pain was so bad. I could only work for half a day. I had to bring on other practitioners and train them so that I could cover this overhead. I mean, at one point I had $135,000 of expenses every single month. And it was just incredibly stressful. So I had fatigue for 5 years. and it just about destroyed my career and my marriage and my relationship with my daughter. I had this, newborn, well, she wasn't so newborn at that point. She had this toddler who says, "Daddy, play with me." And all I could do was like lie on the couch. And
Yeah.
so it was like the worst thing ever. And so that's when I kind of went on this path and figured out that, it's really all about the causes.
Okay.
Is that we know whether or not we're working on a car or
Yeah.
whether or not we've got a human resources issue at work. Like, if we figure out what the problem is, we can fix it, right? So I knew that if I found all of the causes of fatigue, I could fix my own fatigue. And so that's what I did, is that I went to every conference that I could, read every book that I could, found all of the causes that are listed everywhere for fatigue, and I started applying them to my own life. I started them applying to my patients, and naturally people who had fatigue gravitated towards me, and they didn't even have to have bad fatigue like I did. It's also just people who thought that they were just getting older, and they're like, "Oh, I'm just getting older." And it's like, no, there's something that's telling you that there's something wrong going on, and you have to pay attention. Your body is screaming at you. And so then we were able to figure out those causes for those people and really help them achieve new levels of energy. I had a 68-year-old patient the other day who told me that he feels like he's 30. He feels better than he did when he was 30. And so it's never too late. There's always more that we can do to find these causes.
And I do believe so. One of the things we always talk about inside the juice ritual, and everybody watching this, you're probably like, "Oh my gosh, here she goes again." But it is really truth. It is a truth, according to me, that you should feel amazing and that you should 100% have very powerful sovereignty over your health, and be able to constantly up level that, in a sense, kind of grow younger. We're not really meant to age and decay. And I believe, and one of the reasons I think you're such an amazing guest, and I have a surprise for you guys at the end, so everyone watch till the end. One of the reasons I think you're an amazing guest is fatigue is one of the like sneaky things. It's sneaky, it's
Oh
not
yeah.
like over, it's not like in your face all the time. It's sneaky. So fatigue is one of those ways that, or one of those things that we can really hone in on and maybe look at some of those causes, and then really kind of get this up leveled, optimal performance. So I'll give me kind of as an example. I would tell you right now today, I have no fatigue. I got a whole bunch of energy, and I'm, super, energetic. But there are days in the afternoon where, I mean, for 30, it only takes 15 or 20 minutes where I just have to take a nap. And so I'm wondering, is that a normal thing, or is that fatigue that I don't know? Is there something going on that would cause that? And so that's what I say to you guys. Fatigue is something that can be sneaky. So one question I would have sort of right off the bat is, what's kind of the number one thing that you think is super sneaky about fatigue? What do you find in working with a lot of your patients? You're like, oh yeah, it's sort of like a common theme where you would know, wow, I've got some work to do in the fatigue category.
Well, it's really about what you said, is that it kind of sneaks up on us, and that as humans, we're amazing at adapting. And so as we get older and we're more exposed to life, and there's more wear and tear and whatnot, and there's certain aspects of our health that start to decline, all of a sudden we may, a lot of people think that fatigue oftentimes happens all of a sudden, where they're like, one day I was fine and the next day I wasn't. And it actually doesn't work that way. It has to do with the number of stressors that we have throughout our lives. So it's kind of like, all right, you're born, and if there's any sort of abuse or any sort of rejection of a peer group or any sort of mental emotional stressor that happens growing up, and then maybe there's allergies, and maybe there's tonsils that get removed, and maybe you have headaches growing up, maybe you have bad periods, then maybe you get into relationships, you have bad relationship breakup, you get exposed to some mold when you're going to medical school like I did, or you get mercury fillings, and so it all adds up. And then maybe there's a divorce, or there's a stressful job, or there's going through residency, or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden you get fatigue. And so it's kind of like there's a straw that
Yeah.
breaks the camel's back, but it was this buildup over time. And so, as exactly like you said, it is this reversal that we can do if we're working on all of these potential stressors and remove them out of the body, whether they're mental or emotional or physical stressors, where the mental emotional stuff is negative emotional patterns that we've all done to kind of adapt to this world, to how our parents were, to how to how to relate to people around us in order to stay safe. And then the physical stressors like heavy metals and chemical toxicity, molds, infections, allergies, all of those things as well. So those are that's like big picture view of all of these stressors that really have to be removed. And that's kind of I think the sneakiest, well, that's one of the sneaky things. And then the second thing I would say is that people don't realize that when they have fatigue, it's never one thing.
Okay, so that's a good point. It's never just the one like, oh, I fixed this one thing and I'm healed. Or I'm cured or whatever the like I have no more fatigue, whatever how the language would be. It's generally a combination of a lot of things. I can tell you right off the bat, before having this discussion with you, even though I do really talk a lot in our group about chasing good health does not mean that we just are concerned with our physical body. It does not mean that. It means, yes, we got to constantly be cleaning it up from the inside out. It's a constant quest. It never stops, right? We just continue up leveling it to the next level, right?
Right.
We also have to work on our emotional health and making sure that there's a lot of clearance and flow, that we've got, a lot of peace in that sort of arena, and that we've got clear thinking and we can make good decisions, and that we feel sort of free in that space. And then also that we can also work on our spiritual vision. People that are connected to a purpose and a spiritual vision, live longer, they're much happier, and there's a lot of research to, support that. And so it's all three of those things.
Absolutely.
However, before this call, if you had asked me, how do you think, Kimmy, that you might fix your fatigue, I would say mold, environmental, like I would only have talked about the physical body, right? That would have been the number one thing. I don't know that I would have gone to kind of like the emotional clearance and maybe even the spiritual vision, things that I talk about all the time. So see, fatigue is sneaky. It's a sneaky thing.
It is sneaky.
Sneaky, but it has a big impact on our ability to be kind of an optimal human, perform optimal humans and really kind of grow younger. So interesting. So you learned that, right, throughout all your studies of fixing fatigue for your wife, who you were so desperate to help, and for yourself in med school. And that's probably how you sort of said, I've got to write a book to help everybody, right? How can I share this learning? Because I don't know if any other people that sort of focus on fatigue like you. So you're sort of like got the big niche there. That's awesome. So so what happened next? So you're fixing your own fatigue and you say, wow, I don't really want to practice medicine in the conventional space, and I really want to kind of turn this online so that I can help more people. Or you just said, it's such a powerful concept, I just want to focus on that.
Yeah, so there were a couple of things that happened. Part of it was looking around and realizing that my life wasn't sustainable and I wasn't happy. I didn't spend enough time with my kid, with my wife, doing things that I love. I'm a singer, I'm a dancer, I play guitar, like those are things that I love to do, and I wasn't doing them at all. I actually went and saw my therapist at the time, and I said, I'm really depressed, blah, blah, whatever. And she said, well, what did you used to do when you were 10 that you enjoyed doing? And I said, well, music and sports. And she said, well, just do those things. And I said, oh yeah, what a great idea, right? So I just, so I had to,
Thank you for that. That was
I
good.
know, right? It's amazing what happens. And so I realized, okay, so how do I start prioritizing these things more? And so I realized, part of this process is visualizing what my ideal life looks like. And when I also work with physicians to help them create their ideal practice and their ideal lives. And so I looked at everything that was going on in my life that I didn't like and going on in my practice that I didn't like. And I said, well, what would my life look like if I got rid of this stuff?
Right.
And so I ended up transitioning to a virtual practice because I also realized that if I want to help 1 million people resolve their fatigue, which really became my mission, there's no way that I could do that one-on-one.
Right. No way.
And I also didn't like the uncertainty of having, expenses, my overhead every single month of being so expensive, so now I, work out of my home and something hits like COVID-19 and I'm very sustainable because my overhead is so low. I don't have all these people that I have to pay and the mortgages that I had and all that sort of stuff too. So it's just simplified my life a lot, which is something that I really recommend to people. Like, what's most important to you, and do those things. and decrease these other things. And it's also helped my fatigue an incredible amount, especially the emotional and the spiritual, being able to have that mission in life is so energizing every single morning. How do I help another person resolve their fatigue?
Yeah, and also, when you think about kind of the telemedicine aspect and what's happened in that space, now it's really possible to have a very meaningful relationship with a physician via a Zoom call like this. I mean,
Right.
I'm essentially sitting across from you, even though we are across the country, which is really amazing. And I think you can really get to know someone. And I mean, now with all the abilities to just have labs sent right to your home, it's just amazing, kind of the work you can do. And so a question just about this. So if anybody wanted, do you also just kind of serve as, this is just a general question, as like the primary care physician for people? Do you have some patients that maybe have sort of overcome their fatigue and you're just kind of like their doctor of choice? Or do you really just kind of graduate people once they're sort of like not have fatigue anymore?
That's a great question. So, um, yes and yes. So, the focus is on fatigue, but there are people who came with me from my brick and mortar practice who
Okay.
wanted to continue with me, who we resolved their fatigue, and then they graduate. So, they go from like a once a month program to every other month, or every 3 months, or every 6 months, or every 12 months. So I have people who I see once a year, but they can message me anytime that they want. They have me in their back pocket if they need me, but I don't operate as a primary care anymore. It's just for those people, it's like just functional medicine. It's just specialty medicine. It's not practicing any sort of primary care anymore, because that was one of the things that I realized, oh my gosh, all the paperwork and all the logistics and all the licensing and the insurance and all that sort of stuff was not something that I wanted to spend my time doing. It was not the best use of my time.
Yeah, so I think for a lot of you guys inside the Juice Ritual, we all are sort of birds of a feather. We're all sort of a like-minded group. I think we sort of share a lot of common themes there. One of the things that I have kind of struggled with, and maybe some of you guys are too watching this, is this idea that I haven't been to a doctor in I don't know, years, a lot of years, a long lot of years. And I'm grateful for that, right? In a lot of ways. I don't even have whatever you would call like a primary care physician. I don't even have anybody that I would see. So
Hmm.
that could be problematic. I don't know if that's problematic or not problematic. What I did do is I did some functional lab testing, and I got probably the most in-depth information about myself than I've ever had, certainly by way of any doctor's visit. So for you guys who have not considered functional lab testing, and that just means things like, omega-3 acids and things that you just generally don't get. Blood work just doesn't tell much about the whole picture, is what I've learned. So if you haven't done that, I would encourage you to do that. And I know that you do that inside of your practice. And so again, stay on till the end because it's sort of a special treat for everyone. But you know, I find that that's going to be a place for a lot of people going forward. Is how do they enter into this kind of like integrative naturopathic space, and sort of let go of more of the approach they've had before, which is you go to a primary care physician, you have some blood drawn. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, how do you find best for people to enter that they just kind of start working with somebody, sort of like develop a relationship? Do you get that question a lot? I mean, I think that's a question a lot of people will have in this group.
Yeah, I mean, some of it has to do with the access that people have, if they want to stay local. I mean, now, especially with telemedicine, exploding since we're all,
Yeah,
quarantining, then, you can really have access to so many more people across state lines, which is really great.
yeah.
But yeah, it's really about the need of the individual, because like as I take people through my program, like a level one problem that somebody might have is if they have a lifestyle issue, like they're not getting enough sleep, not getting enough water, not getting enough movement, not getting enough good food, or they're eating the wrong foods, right? You fix those things, which I know you guys talk a lot about
Right.
in your program, and if you get 100% better, then great, you're good to go. That's a level one problem.
Okay.
If you have deficiencies, that you need to fix, whether this is deficiencies in hormones like adrenals, thyroid, estrogen, progesterone, deficiencies in something called the mitochondria that makes 70 to 80% of all of our energy, all of our ATP,
Mhm.
or excuse me, or deficiencies in nutrients like vitamins or minerals, B12, vitamin D,
Right.
iron, magnesium, stuff like that, then that's a level 2 problem. So if you have specific, and this is where the functional medicine testing comes in, is because it's going to be different for every single person out there. So what may work for you is not going to work for somebody else.
Right.
And so it's really important to get these things tested and
Yeah.
then to take what's specific for you. You can figure out exactly what supplements you need,
Right.
and then you're going to feel so much better. You're not going to waste money on this supplement over here because you read that magnesium might be good for blood pressure,
I
but you
was
don't have a
worried about.
magnesium deficiency.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And I'll tell everybody a real story about this. And I talked to you about it last weekend when we were doing this. I fell into that trap. I've had functional lab testing, and nowhere in the protocol or the supplement list for me to address the things that I needed was zinc. Nowhere in that list. However, I saw something about really kind of like upping your sort of wellness game during this COVID-19 time.
Mm-hmm.
I already have a great internal terrain. I don't know why I felt compelled to do this, but what did I do? I bought zinc. I had it shipped to my house. I started taking it and I was so sick. I had to almost, I mean, in the house right now, I would take it and 10 minutes later, I would have to be face down on the floor for a few minutes. It would leave quickly, as quickly as it came. And it took me a couple of times to figure it out. So I think I was talking to you about it, and, not everybody needs additional zinc. And for some people, they are sensitive to that. And as it turns out, I think at your suggestion, I looked at the multivitamin I take, which already has zinc in it. So I
Right.
didn't need that extra. So that's a good example of, not falling prey to this by this or that kind of supplement of the week, because it's not always necessary. And I wasted some money. And, obviously I didn't feel good for 3 days. So I think the lab testing, I can't recommend it enough. So a question for you, in optimally for somebody working with you, would you do the functional lab testing or some lab work once a year? Because what I'm worried about is I had this over a year ago. And so now how do I know that it's better, worse, something different? I mean, that's a question I had. So do you get that question a lot, or do you have sort of a plan that you have people follow?
Absolutely. So yeah, once again, it's like, what are they dealing with? Because the once a year stuff is people they've resolved their fatigue,
Mhm.
and now they just want to prevent illnesses from happening. We want to prevent heart attack, heart disease, stroke, and Alzheimer's.
Yep.
And so we can do that because we know what the cause, oh, and cancer. So we know what the causes of those things are. And a lot of them are actually environmental. There are some genetic causes. You may need additional fish oils because you're Norwegian, or you have a certain genetic SNP, or single nucleotide polymorphism, a certain gene that's not working quite right. That means that your blood is going to be a little bit thicker. So you can run very easy tests to get, and these are actually going to be blood tests, but a lot of them are urine tests or stool tests that we can do. But you can do those tests and you can determine, okay, what is your actual risk of having a heart attack, heart disease, stroke, getting Alzheimer's or cancer?
Right.
And so then we can reverse those things. We now know that 7 out of 10 brains of Alzheimer's have Lyme in it.
7 out of 10. That's crazy.
7 out of 10 in one study that they did. So we also know that with Alzheimer's, a lot of it's, and with cancer, a lot of it's environmental. So we're looking at heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections. All of these things are going to increase your chance of having those things. There's a study that's done by the Breast Cancer Fund, and they compile all the data from the last like 5 or 10 years. You can Google it and you can look at it. And what they have found is that upwards of 70% of all the causes of breast cancer are environmental. So it is from all of those toxicities, and that it's really, 78% is environmental and 20% is genetic. And
Yeah.
that's why, as we get older, we are more likely to get cancer, is because of all the crap that we're exposed to along this path. Like 100,000 pounds of mercury are dumped in our oceans every single year. So if we're consuming fish, any kind of fish, unfortunately, the smaller the better, but any kind of fish, the bigger ones have a lot more mercury. You're going to be putting mercury in your body. If you've got mercury fillings in your mouth. You bite down and that mercury vapor you swallow. Mercury is a neurotoxin. There are 84,000 chemicals that we're exposed to on a regular basis in all of our products, and most of those haven't been appropriately tested by the FDA. So there's a lot of crap that we're exposed to. Mold is one of those things that I was going to think about for an answer. One of those sneaky fatigue things is because half of all the buildings in our country have water damage, and most of those have mold. And
Yeah.
so mold will cause neuropathies, brain fog, autoimmune diseases, fatigue. I mean, it is a huge problem that people aren't talking about because you can't see it. If you actually see mold in your home, it is the tip of the iceberg, and there's a crap load of mold that's behind those walls.
Yeah.
So most of the time people don't even, you can do tests now in your home which are quite good, but you may not even see mold, and you still would have mold in your home.
Yeah, so that's something that most of us probably don't even think about, right? I mean, I live in a house that's over 100 years old. I can't even imagine. In some ways, I think the older houses are they have a little more fortitude, but it's something that I've never had our house checked for mold. So something that I'm going to do just as a precaution. So, I mean, the whole idea of this speaks to you. It really is kind of never stopping, right? You do have to continually be sort of up leveling and seeking the next thing and really optimizing, and it's never really fully done. It's not, I use the thing like, do you graduate people, but it's never really done, right? The work, there's always the next level. There's always that next level of more optimal. Do you think that's true?
Um, Kind of, but I also don't like to make it stressful.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so in terms of improving, there shouldn't be a pressure to kind of improve every day. Like there's certain things which you want to get set. It's like estate planning,
yeah,
right? You want to make sure you've got your will and whatever else, so that if anything happens, that you've got your power of attorney and stuff like that. And so once you know what your abnormal labs are and what supplements you need to be taking, then you're pretty good to go for years, and you're going to give yourself 10 or more really good years of quality health, so that you're not one of those people who retires and dies,
right, right.
right?
That's
Because who
right.
wants that? You've saved all this money and have all these plans for retirement, and then you die. And so, knowing what your risks are
That's cool.
for right, heart attack, heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, and cancer, you know, just makes it so much better. And then you're halfway there by doing all that lifestyle stuff that you're doing. And this is just kind of like, this is where the up leveling comes in to really take it to the next level with all this other toxicity, the environmental stuff that I'm talking about.
Yeah, so basically all of these factors can present themselves as fatigue, and you just don't have, because you don't have heart disease, you don't have cancer, you don't have some of the sort of like biggies, but you do have fatigue. You don't realize that there are some serious warning lights going off inside of your body.
Exactly.
It can be kind of one of the early ones. Is that fair? That it's sneaky, but it can be one of those like early indicator lights that say, hey, you need to be looking inward and address some or many of these small things that you could do that together would make a huge impact and potentially keep you from the biggie warning indicator light down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because you're absolutely right. The causes of fatigue are also the causes of all that disease, what we call diseases of longevity. The longer you live, the more of them you get.
Yeah, yeah,
And so that's why it's so important. And if you can treat fatigue, this is why I tell physicians you can treat anything, because all of the causes of fatigue, because there are so many causes. I mean, I found at this point there's 10 categories. And
okay.
then of those categories, there are 33 different causes of fatigue that I look at in my programs.
33.
33 different causes, and 75% of those can be determined based off of people's symptoms.
Okay.
So I have checklists, so you don't even have to get like a crap ton of labs or anything like that.
Wow. Okay, so that's good to know for everybody that is thinking about this. And again, you have to stay on to the end because that was a very, very, very important thing that I want to show you. As like me, sometimes like, okay, I've heard the gist. No, you got to stay till the very end, because there's something special for you guys. So that's really interesting. And, I think about, kind of indicator lights, like in a car, they're not to ignore relative to our health, right? It's so much easier to kind of address it when it comes up than wait, till it's something much, much worse and maybe harder to kind of get at. So Do you think that conventional medicine do you feel that some of the more conventional approaches to medicine and some physicians in that sort of space fully are starting to also look inward to some of these causes, or do you still feel like there's a pretty big gap?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's still a big gap, and it's not even just the conventional docs. So even the natural docs and the functional medicine docs, oftentimes they're doing great work, but they're more generalists. And
Okay.
if they're not focused on fatigue, they're definitely missing some things, because oftentimes, even if it's a functional medicine doc, which hopefully your community knows about, but it's basically combining conventional medicine and natural medicine and looking at the biochemical individuality of the person, oftentimes they're not looking at the environmental toxicity. So they're not looking at the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, or if they are, and they're specializing usually in one of those. So
Okay.
like if you Googled mold expert in your area, you might find somebody, but oftentimes they're not going to be addressing the infections, the heavy metals, and the chemicals for the most part.
Right.
And that's huge because they all actually interplay.
Right.
And like you can't get rid of infections if you have heavy metals, chemicals, or molds, because they take the immune system, send it off over here in left field, and you can't get rid of infections if you don't have a somewhat intact immune system.
Right, right. Which now more than ever, right, is when we should be really, really, really worried about that and supporting our immune system just at the highest level.
Absolutely.
Because you believe this statement to be true or false. So I didn't. I told you a couple of questions I was going to ask earlier. I didn't tell you this one, so this is a surprise, right?
Bring it on.
Do you think that the body, sort of its innate intelligence, can cure itself from anything, given the right,
In
you know, tools, meaning the right amount of, you know, support, meaning you have the right vitamins and minerals and enzymes, so you have optimal courses there, and that you've, you know, addressed a lot of things. Do you think that that's possible? True.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you with that last clarification, because the challenge that we end up seeing a lot in different diseases, including fatigue, is the body trying to fix itself and getting stuck in a negative loop. So, for example, if you have heavy metals, chemicals, molds, or infections, I'm starting to sound like a broken record, right? I call those the usual suspects
Yeah.
because they're so common in the people that I see. But if you have this crap in your body is going to try to get rid of it, and it's going to mount an inflammatory response. So like we all know about inflammation, we know about inflammatory foods, right? And we know that inflammation is great if it is acute.
Right.
So basically, you break a leg.
Appropriately, right?
Yep. So
Yeah.
you break a leg, you scratch yourself or whatever, you get a whole bunch of swelling, redness, pain to the area. It heals it up, and then you're all better, right? But what ends up happening when you have like heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and infections that are in the body, that are hiding in the body, is you get chronic inflammation.
Mhm.
So the immune system is trying to get rid of this crap because its job is to get rid of foreign things that aren't supposed to be there. It's trying to get rid of it, but it can't really find it. Or
Right.
sometimes it's like hidden inside the thyroid. And so it has to go through the thyroid in order to find this thing, and you get autoimmunity to the thyroid, or it's in the joints and it has to attack the joint in order to find this thing, and you get rheumatoid arthritis, like autoimmunity to the joints.
Right.
So this is where the body is confused, and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, but because of these toxicities, it's not able to heal itself. But you remove all that crap,
Yep.
you replace the deficiencies, and absolutely the body heals itself.
Yeah, so I should have asked that question with a little more clarity, meaning that your body is an incredible healing machine if you have the right vitamins, minerals, enzymes, all the nutrients that you need in the right amounts, and you do not have hidden toxicities that are sort of plaguing the whole system and causing the body to be a little bit confused in its like immune system attack, you know. So we want it to be able to turn inflammation on and off. And I actually just wrote a little thing about this because of the inflammation tonic, because, you know, everybody, I think, thinks inflammation is just bad, bad news, bad news, bad news, but it's actually not bad news. It's
Right.
bad news when it's stuck in the on position.
Right.
It doesn't turn on and off as it should, right? And that's kind of the thing. But okay, so that's good. I believe that too. I mean, I believe that the whole vaccine or not vaccine source is just such a huge debate. And so I stay out of it. But what I think is true is that the body can, for the most part, if you're just constantly striving and working to create a great internal terrain in your body that is free of those types of toxicities, then you're going to probably not have as much fatigue. You're probably going to be kind of living optimally. You're going to have better immune system support. So all the things. So if any of you guys need help in this regard, that's your area of expertise. And fatigue just happens to be one of the early indicator lights that you really focus on and help people kind of look inward to say, hey, what kind of thing can I address right now to be a little more optimal, ultimately to prevent these biggies down the road.
Absolutely. And one thing I would add to what you just said too is that the toxicities actually cause most of the deficiencies. So what we find is that you remove the toxicities and you don't have to take all of the stuff to replace the deficiencies, the
Yeah.
hormones and the nutrients and all that sort of stuff. You got good lifestyle, you get rid of your toxicities, and you need very few supplements.
Yeah, that's another subject, and so it's actually one. So everybody, I'm going to say Evan is going to be our expert in May. So for the 4 weeks in May, he's going to be teaching us some really interesting things we can do and things to learn about these kind of early indicator lights, especially fatigue, and how we might do that. And also, this is almost the end, so I'll go ahead and share. Inside the Juice ritual that you're active in your inside right now, he's going to give you a 45-minute consultation with him for free. So you can sign up, work with him one-to-one, kind of get his sort of like one-to-one help for 45 minutes. That's kind of like unheard of. So, I mean, thank you so much for opening up slots for our group. It is like the nicest thing ever. And I'm so thankful for you for doing that. And so I'm going to post a link for everybody in our Facebook group about how to do that. And then we'll be hearing from you during the month of May and a little more specific. But here's one thing I definitely want you to talk to us about in May. And it is this idea of like the expensive pea syndrome. And I don't know how many of you guys have kind of heard of that, but it's something right on my mind because I have an entire cabinet full of stuff. And I'm finding myself, even though I know better, I just said functional testing is where I'm finding as I progress down this path, if that's what it is, of learning more about how my body works and studying how really to optimize that and potentially address any warning lights. I find that I'm tending to buy a few supplements that I'm not entirely sure that I need or that will work in concert with what I already have. And so that's one of the things I want. And so the whole idea, you guys, of like this expensive fee is that Kimmy's taking all these supplements in here and I don't really need them because I believe I have really addressed a lot of toxicity. So I just wonder, I want you to talk to us about that in May for sure. Your thoughts on that and how we might avoid that peril. I just ordered 2 supplements I can't even pronounce. So I'm falling into the trap, you guys. I'm falling in. I'm gonna have to, have a shepherd to lead me out of this hole that I'm going down. So, yeah.
Well, what's important to remember, I mean, there's a couple of things here, but what's important to remember is that all labs are imperfect.
Right.
So we're talking about, yes, functional labs are better than regular blood labs, but a lot of this stuff is really a snapshot in time unless you're collecting like a 6-hour urine or whatever. And then even then, are you collecting what's actually getting into the cells? Are you collecting what's in the blood? So it is challenging, which is why you can determine a lot of the causes in my program with your symptoms, why 75% of the causes can be determined by your symptoms. Because you always have to take all the data available. So you have to take your subjective experience, which is your history and your symptoms, and then combine it with any objective data, which is physical exam, or like what is happening to you physically that you can actually see, and then also what sort of labs that you have, and putting that together, and then that creates a picture, and then you can make a determination, and then you can take some support for that. So these might be supplements. I mean, there's a lot of really great supplements out there, and this might be a supplement that you can't actually test for. Maybe you can't test for the levels of zeolite in your body, or astaxanthins, or zeaxanthins, or whatever, because there's no test out there that's going to test for it. But you know that it's a good antioxidant. And so for me, but for me, what I'm always trying to do is give people the biggest bang for the buck.
Right.
Because those things can be helpful. They are antioxidants, but so is the juice ritual.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's amazing antioxidant. And then if you're avoiding gluten, and you're exercising, and you're getting rid of these toxicities out of your body, like, you don't need to have all of these extra natural anti-inflammatories. Like, how much ginger and turmeric and boswellia do you need? And how much of these antioxidants do you actually need? You don't need them if you have greatly decreased the amount of inflammation in your body, because you've gone after the causes. The question that you really need to be asking is this supplement a Band-Aid, or is it actually going after the actual causes? And if it's not going after these toxicities, or if it's not replacing some sort of genetic issue, then it is most likely a Band-Aid, which is okay.
Right.
Like, I give people adrenal support and thyroid support and mitochondrial support because that's incredibly helpful. But in reality, you want to decrease the amount of that as much as
Right.
possible.
Right, right. I was just reading something about that. So that really is an important concept for everybody to think about. And it is that supplements can be, in some ways, a Band-Aid to the real sort of like the real issue causing the warning light. And it can help in a temporary way, just like a Band-Aid does help the cut to heal. It can help in some ways, but what you would want to avoid, at least what I'm hearing, is that you would constantly apply adrenal support as a supplement without addressing the cause of why you might have adrenal imbalance to begin with. And that's important, and that's a good distinction to think about. I was reading something recently. I'm reading a book called Dirty Genes, and so you talk about, for the non-medical professional, I did not go to med school. I'm not going to med school. For the non-medical professional, this is the kind of book from Peter I have to read one page 5 times. So it's taking a while, right? So I read one page, I'm like, wow, okay. I'm gonna read that one more time. So I read it again. And I've recommended this book for you guys because I do think it's interesting. But he talked about, Dr. Ben Lynch talked a little bit about that too, which is, hey folks, don't be taking a supplement to help your body do methylation. Find out why it's not doing that, to begin with. So I thought his discussion there, echoes what you say, which is, not to do that. So we're going to have a lot of fun in May. You never know what sort of crazy questions we're going to throw at you, so be ready. But
I'm excited. I'm
yeah,
excited.
I'm so thankful that you're going to be with us, because I do think that the unique approach that you take to it, especially with the checklist and really looking at fatigue and understanding that is not a normal, it is not, oh, I'm just getting old, so I'm supposed to be tired, is the wrong answer. And so for all of us, we're going to have lots of high energy by May, I hope, with some of your tips. And for everybody, you get 45 free minutes with Dr. Evan Hirsch, which, thank you so much again. My last question that I ask everybody is, what does chasing good health mean to you, and how do you think that you do it? What's your sort of your best thing that you think, wow, I really chase good health, I do this?
So I think that chasing good health for me, the biggest part, I think, is mindset.
Yeah. Okay. That's a
You
very
know,
good. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that, and you and I went through this program, that was really supportive on mindset. And so I do that practice every day, which is looking at 3 gratitudes. They can be the same 3 gratitudes every day. I look at what I want my perfect day to look like. What's the vision that I have for my life, whether it's a week from now, a month from now, 10 years from now. And then what are the limiting beliefs that I have in my life that I need to flip into empowering beliefs? And so especially during, now the time of COVID-19
Oh, yeah.
and any sort of world stressor, any sort of stressor in general, for me, in order to stay out of scarcity and overwhelm and other limiting beliefs that I have, I'm always thinking, okay, life is always working out for me. Whenever I start to get stressed, life is always working out for me. There's a beautiful design. There is no urgency to everything. Everything is going to work out exactly as planned. And that's really reassuring for me because I believe that to be true. I know that to be true because that's, my life has turned out that way. And so I, uh, I focus on these things and they're incredibly helpful for me. And
Yeah.
then part of that is also then my health is focusing on that. And like, how do I, my vision for my health is, being able to be 70 years old and, being able to run on the beach and do yoga and
Yeah.
lift weights and
Yeah.
all of these sort of things that I'm moving very slowly towards every single day so that I can eventually achieve that goal. So, because I'm constantly working on myself and all the different aspects of my health, and know that it's really all about constant and never-ending improvement. That is really what my life is about, and having a growth mindset.
Yeah, and I think that's great. That's a great suggestion and a great way to do it because your body does hear everything you say. It does hear everything that you feel. And one of the things that I've started doing recently, which kind of is along what you say, is I've started really talking to my body. So now I'm going way down.
Nice.
I'm way down the hole forever. You should sign off now, guys, because it's but I've been asking my body the questions that I want an answer to, and just it doesn't talk back, FYI, not yet. But really just trying to listen inward and realize that my mind is really connected. My emotional body is really connected to my physical body, and so how do I kind of bridge that gap and kind of be a better listener versus just piling in things. But do I really need that? What do I actually feel like? And what's the answer coming from within, right? And trying to just kind of keep that really powerful sovereignty over my health, which is essentially what you say with mindset. You have to constantly be working in that space. So that was great. Well, thank you so much. And I cannot thank you enough for your generosity to open up spots for us because I know that that's a huge thing for you. So thank you so much for doing that. And all of you guys, lucky, lucky ducks. I'll get the link out in our group today because sign up quickly so that we don't get overrun your schedule in May. So we'll try and, piece it in together so that not all of us are trying to, have our 45 minutes right off the bat. So thank
And
you.
just a little clarification on the call. So, on this call, what we're going to do is we're going to do a deep dive into the issues that you're having. So this is mainly for people who have fatigue, but if you have other issues, I'd be happy to support you. And then I'll make some recommendations. I'll listen to what's going on for you. I'll make some recommendation about what next steps are. And then the call will essentially be done. If you do want to hear about what programs I have to offer, I'm happy to share those with you. But if you don't, there's no pressure at all, and that you guys can go off and use the information that I share with you. But I just want to serve. I mean, you've got such a I love working with health conscious achievers, and I know those are the people who are in your program, and so I'm happy to support you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much.